You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast, where we focus on financial strategies for building a profitable food business. I'm your host, Sarah Delavan. Today on the podcast, I am joined by leadership development, community building, and crowdfunding expert, Elizabeth Eichhorn. Elizabeth is a two-time female founder who has successfully raised capital for her own business via crowdfunding and now shares her expertise as a startup coach for iFund Women. On this episode, she shares her journey into the food world, why she decided to fund her first food business through crowdfunding, how to choose the right type of crowdfunding option for your business, hint, there's more than one type, the key ingredients for a successful campaign, and a whole lot more. Let's get to it. Okay, so you are a startup coach for iFund Women. And for anyone who's listening in who may not be familiar with iFund Women, it is a marketplace for women-owned businesses and the people who want to fund them. I love that so much. So they offer access to capital through online fundraising, access to small business grants from corporate partners, business coaching, and networking, obviously, amongst all of the business owners that are a part of iFund Women. And you work with all different types of businesses as a startup coach there, not just food business owners. And I'm super excited to talk about that. But before you joined iFund Women, I know that you founded two different businesses, both of them centered around food and connection. And you successfully raised capital via crowdfunding to get one of those businesses up and running. So before we start talking about iFund Women and all of the amazing things that you are doing there, I would love if you could take us back a little bit. The beginning, like, how did you get into hospitality? And then when did this idea to launch a food business happen and why? Just fill us in.
So I got into hospitality kind of on a whim. I had finished college and was needing an internship. And sure enough, the internship I got was at a retreat center. And I ended up working directly under the COO, and his job essentially was running the operations on this 1,900 acre ranch. And I was his intern, and I was like, cool, that's going to be so fun. I can do this. The one thing that I didn't realize is that his background was as a restaurateur and an executive chef out of London. And he then said, okay, so you're going to work in the kitchen and you're going to have to figure out how to do all of these things. And I was fine with it because it came really naturally to me based off of the fact that I come from a large extended family, and my grandmother always loved to cook and she loved baking. And so that was kind of what I would do with my grandmother. So I understood that side of it. I just didn't know that I would love the kitchen so much and understand this, like, oh, I actually am getting trained by this professional and having to work in this very fast paced kind of idea and work the line. And I just kind of got thrown into it.
Wow. I did not know that was part of your story, that you were thrown into the kitchen and working on the line and all of that. That's fascinating. Mm-hmm. So how long did you do that for?
So I did it for, it's hard to describe, but a little over a year and a half. And then I got picked up and recruited by a hotel out of Aspen, Colorado, and moved to Aspen, Colorado after that.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. So, okay. So you start out as an intern, you get thrown into the kitchen, you fall in love. Now you're working for a hotel in Aspen. How long are you in Aspen and what happens next?
So I'm only in Colorado for a year, and I am there as the head of reservations and front desk supervisor. And my job was to essentially take care of all of the guests who came in, try to do all the reservations and sales. And then I was just putting out fires all the time. And so I constantly was trying to figure out best ways and best scenarios to continue to, I guess, make sure that this really big hotel, family-run hotel, was then moving forward. And what was so different is that here was this family-run, beautiful little quaint hotel that became there was something like 30 rooms, and then we had 127 rooms when I came on board.
Wow.
And so we covered that, and then we covered the condos next door. that were then celebrity owned condos, and we had to oversee the management of that. So I was really busy and got exhausted very fast.
Right,
And so I was only there a year. People always ask if I had been skiing or snowboarding during that time. I went on the mountain twice during the full year I was there. I mean, that's how I was 23 at the time and had like a BlackBerry and an iPhone next to my phone, like next to my bed sleeping. I was literally that person, and I just burnt out really fast.
Wow.
So funny story is that I immediately, I left and I drove back to Texas where I'm from, and I went straight to the retreat center to be a guest at a retreat. And while I was there, I thought, okay, I don't know what else I'm going to do. And there was a woman there who was very much a mentor to me, and she said, okay, you should go to grad school. So I literally applied to the grad school, and 6 weeks later I was in California.
Wow. So you got an MBA. Is that what you?
I have a master's in leadership.
Okay. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that explains a lot about the rest of your journey.
Yeah. Now you're like, oh, I know the rest of her story. So that makes sense.
How did you choose leadership?
Well, I didn't initially. I just was going to be a youth director, funny enough, and was connected to the church. And I, once again, got burnt out on that as well. And thankfully, and this was good for me from a business side. Thankfully, I understood that the degree program I was initially going into wasn't as practical. And so I was able to change mid-course, and that was really great for me. And so that was really what happened. And at the time, I really didn't know what I was going to do.
Right.
I graduated and I was lost, but that's also when I got diagnosed with food allergies. Was in the middle of grad school.
Interesting. And so is the food allergies, from kind of having some insight into your story, that's sort of that, this happens for so many people who start food businesses, especially good food businesses, right? And the sort of like the better for you food businesses. Something happens to us personally. We don't have a solution in the grocery store or where we're buying our food. And those of us who are made of that material, we just say, well, I'm going to have to do it myself. I'm going to have to figure out a way to make it work. So what is your story? So you're diagnosed with celiac. What's missing for you?
Well, so the hard part is not only was I diagnosed with celiac, I was first diagnosed with a corn allergy, and they thought there might be something else there. And so I was left literally at the allergist office, and he was like, congratulations, here are your test results. Good luck. Like, no pamphlet, there's nothing. There's like no education about it. The next day I get like it's within the same time frame, I get the results about being celiac, and I am just like devastated of, well, what do you do when you have a corn allergy, and having to understand that everything has corn in it? And I'm in grad school and on the very tight budget and trying to figure out how to eat, because I am not shopping at Whole Foods at this moment. Right. And Whole Foods seems to be the only option for me. And so I decided to finish my master's, and then I ended up going back and getting a certificate of nutrition and health. And then that's when I got my certificate of business administration as well.
Wow. So lots of learning, both in the classroom and real life, just figuring out, how do I feed myself? Right. Where do I find the foods to feed myself? And did it make you feel sick if you ate corn or gluten?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I didn't even know what was really happening. Thankfully, I had a friend of mine from grad school, and we were out at breakfast and for a friend's birthday. And I was the one who had driven us there. It was like in Hollywood. We live in Pasadena. So for those of you who don't know, that's still like a 20-minute drive. And it's, so I'm getting to this restaurant, it's in the morning, and I end up falling asleep at the table after I have like a bite or two of like pancakes and like literally pass out. And my friend who was there, who had celiac, was like, you have to go get tested. So I didn't know about what this all was. The thing that made so much sense to me is the pains that I had been feeling though in my stomach, like ulcers and things like that, were pains I had felt in undergrad and my upbringing. And so the thing that made the most sense to me was the fact that I was allergic to corn.
Right.
That made a lot of sense in my history.
Right. Oh, fascinating. So when do you decide I'm going to start a food business and focus on making the foods that you can eat?
Yeah. So this is about a year and a half or 2 years after I got diagnosed with celiac disease.
Okay.
So I got diagnosed about 10 years ago, and Mary Lee Kitchen started about 8 years ago.
Okay. And what was the mission? What were the operations of Mary Lee Kitchen?
Well, the whole thing is I felt incredibly ostracized right after I got diagnosed with a food allergy. So those friends that I was talking about when I could go to breakfast for birthday parties, I was not really able to participate in that.
Right.
And so I was having to do a lot of home cooking, a lot of shifting what I was making. And that was what really pulled me into understanding, okay, what really goes into the food that we're creating and putting on the table and going to the grocery store for. And so I was able to, my passion just continued to grow from there. And so, like I told you earlier, that passion all started from my grandmother, whose name was Mary Lee. And so I just figured, we should tie this all together. And I started a food production company for people with food allergies.
Amazing. Were you selling like wholesale or direct to consumer? What was that setup?
So direct to consumer, on my way to being wholesale. I started simultaneously with the wholesale business, like within coffee shops was the best way to kind of go about doing that.
Yeah.
That was the easiest thing. Like you go and find things and people, but I say it was easy. The amount of people who said no, it was quite a bit at that time. Right. And what's so funny is people are, if they're listening now, are like, what's a gluten-free? You have to remember, this is 8 years ago.
Yeah.
There's that gluten-free wave. Everybody gets laughed at for this.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's not really a thing.
And then you add in the corn allergy and if I'm correct, the products were corn-free, soy-free?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And gluten-free.
Yep, exactly.
So you were meeting a very niche need, but the people who needed it really needed it.
Absolutely. And LA was a great place for that.
Yeah.
So I loved it. I remember there's a grocery store now in Malibu, and my husband at the time was working out there. And so every Sunday he would go to work and I would go to this grocery store because they had this like one sweet item that I could have. And so unless I was always making it, I didn't eat sweets. And so it was literally like this like moment of just complete respite for me. I loved it. So other than that treat, like I was it. I was the one on the market.
Wow. So you've got the business, right? You're selling a bit direct to consumer, you're approaching and selling via cafes and coffee shops. At some point, you decide that you need more capital in the business, you need more money. I would love if you could share some insight into sort of how did you arrive, what was it, or kind of, not, I'm sure it wasn't just one thing, but that made you think, in order for me to do this the way I want to, I need more money. And then you decided to do it via crowdfunding. So I'm curious to know how that decision came about.
Yeah. So there's a few things, and it's so hard because I work in the world of crowdfunding and fundraising now. So it's hard for me not to know the knowledge I have and put that together. So I'm going to try to remind myself that I'm 8 years ago, who I was at eight years ago. So I did a friends and family round initially before I did crowdfunding. So I went to friends and family, and this has to, we have to say this here, and so other people realize this. Friends and family was just now a thing that you could do, and you could do it privately. It wasn't an actual thing like a an investor. At the time, they had just changed the laws, but there was still a lot of things. For those who wanted to be an investor in a company, you still had to have somebody at like a minimum of $50,000 to give into a company. So I'd already tapped my friends and family for a particular round. So the only other option at the moment really was crowdsourcing. And it was rewards-based crowdsourcing. Kickstarter and Indiegogo were the only two on kind of the two platforms. And for those who are listening, Kickstarter is an all or nothing kind of platform. So I did a lot of research at the time. My husband, thankfully, is a gamer. Kickstarter happens to just be kind of like his online mall or marketplace. That he goes to Kickstarter for understanding games and the games that are backed. And so he directed me to blogs, and I did a lot more research of what do you need to do? How do I need to do this? Who do I need to start calling? And so I was able to get the knowledge before I actually launched a campaign.
Do you remember how long that took? Just to give people listening some perspective on that. Like, you didn't just Google some things and read some blogs for like a week and then launch your Kickstarter, I imagine.
No, and I was really rare, surprisingly, because I talk to people now and they're like, we're starting our campaign tomorrow, and they just have had no work put into it. Gosh, I want to say it took me 2 to 3 months of prep work before I launched the campaign.
Fascinating. And then how much money, so it's an all or nothing. So you needed to raise 100% of what your goal was. What was that amount?
So our goal was $7,500. We raised a bit more than that at like $7,900. And so it wasn't this astronomical amount of money that we were trying to raise, but the whole purpose is that we really wanted to shift and change our to offer more products to people. And it's expensive to get. I was doing glass jars. So ours were, I mean, it's a whole thing. Like, I know now, and I get it, like, we have to pay attention to the margins and everything, but I was hell-bent on, well, if I'm going to have a product that's going to fit people's dietary needs, then let's try to make it as sustainable as possible. And glass is the most sustainable product in that space.
Yeah. I want to pause there for a second, because I think if good food business owners are listening, or those who are thinking about launching a good food business, 95% of the people, including myself, when I started a business, we want to do everything as well as we can, the most sustainably, the cleanest source, like all of these things, and they all will drive up your costs. And I think something that a lot of people don't sort of anticipate is and it's gotten better, I think, since we both owned our businesses, right? But like, sourcing those things not only cost more, but sometimes they're more difficult to actually get your hands on. Particularly if you're sourcing in small volume, you're going to pay more per unit. You're going to have to, order from perhaps a website. You can't get a wholesale deal. There's a lot that kind of goes into finding the glass jars and all of those things. And I think many of us sort of start to shift and say, okay, how can I do this in a way that still feels really good, but maybe doesn't cost quite as much money? And if I can get to that glass jar in the future, again, I will. So I just thought that was a good time to kind of pause and talk about that.
You should. I mean, that is absolutely correct. Like, I love the quality of things, and I want that to be a part of the product that I put out in the world. And at the end of the day, though, if you don't have a consumer who is going to buy it, you actually are not going to then sell it, which means you won't have a business. Yeah. I mean, if you don't have the revenue, and that is very much the line that I kept facing but I am adamant, if I don't want to put out a product, and my ethics seem to be kind of feeling frustrated and I'm having to be pulled in different directions, then is this the right thing for me at this time?
Right. So you raise around $8,000 in the Kickstarter. Before we move on, I would love to hear from you. What advice would you give people now who are thinking about crowdsourcing? It sounds like research is important. Do you have any particular resources? Maybe iFund Women is a good resource
Yeah,
for crowdsourcing.
Yes. iFund Women is a fantastic resource for those who are crowdfunding and trying to understand how you're going to do it. You have to pay attention to the rewards that you're going to offer. You need to pay attention to your margins, because the thing is that's where you actually are going to get the funds from a crowdfunding campaign. And more times than not, we look at our rewards and you think, oh, I'm going to put X reward here, and it ends up costing you so much money that you really don't get much return for it. Pay attention to your shipping and handling costs for your rewards, because that is on you as the person who's crowdfunding, not on the person who is funding your campaign.
I love that note. I think shipping and processing costs, handling costs are so important for businesses in general, especially with so much business happening online right now. So I love that you're pointing that out for a crowdfunding campaign specifically. That never crossed my mind, and I bet it doesn't cross the mind of a lot of people who are thinking about what is this product or, gift, sort of making air quotes, that I can provide for the funding. And it's profitable, right? You get to retain some money, but then once you ship, have you experienced this, sort of a random question, but have you experienced someone doing crowdfunding and really not, like, raising money but not benefiting from it financially?
All the time.
Wow.
All the time. And a lot of times that's because their goal is really high and they're not realistic. And so the other thing that we talk about, I talk about this all the time with iFund Women, and what I was great at doing was knowing people and connecting people. And that's actually how I was able to get my own Kickstarter and my own crowdfunder successfully funded, was because I knew how to actually sell the product or tell people about the product, ship the product. And so if you do not know people before you do a crowdfunding campaign, start networking now and build that network, because 80% of the people who are going to fund you are actually going to be the people that you know somehow, some way. It doesn't mean that you have to have a great in-depth relationship with them, but they're going to be somehow tangentially connected to you.
Right. That makes perfect sense. I love that. So pay attention to your rewards, your margins, your shipping and handling, and have a network of people that you are connected with and who know about your product, and I assume the value of your product, who are going to want your product to live on and exist, right? So that they can be a customer of yours. I imagine that's who you're reaching out to, your target market, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely. You're wanting them to continue to know who your company is, go and follow you on Instagram and all the other socials. Absolutely. That's who you're reaching out to. And if you don't know who your target market is, that's a longer conversation. Yeah. I feel like we could definitely have that one, but I will say this to everybody, is that it is important for each and every one of us to realize that you cannot make a product that is going to benefit every single human being on the planet. And so it is okay, and it is vital for you to narrow down your focus so that you can actually succeed and have a clear message.
Love that. Thank you for that. Do you think that there is a type of business or a type of business owner that crowdfunding would not be a good fit for? Like, right off the top of my head, right? If you're not someone who likes to network and who feels comfortable doing that for whatever reason, then crowdfunding is not for you, because that's a huge part of it. Is there anybody else or any other sort of like things to think about before you embark on this that you think people should take into consideration?
Yeah, I think that for so many years, people kept saying it's only a product-based opportunity. And if you only have a product, then those are the only people who can crowdfund. And I disagree with that for a lot of reasons. I think that anybody can actually crowdfund, whether you have a network or not. I think you can grow your network. The reason why is crowdfunding is one of the only opportunities and funding opportunities where a person is not going into their bootstrapping. or they're going into debt. And so I don't want to say that it can't be for anybody. It can be for everybody. You have to put in the work into it. You have to be creative with your rewards, and you have to be willing to, reach out to people and make that ask. And I think more times than not, we turn to credit cards and debt because it's easier, because all you have to do is pick up a phone and you call somebody, you will do an application, and you're approved for what we think is money. Yeah. But the problem is that we don't necessarily have a good business plan. So we're never actually paying that money off. And then we're screwed if things like COVID happen, especially in the hospitality industry, and we're still stuck with a credit card payment to pay. Banks aren't necessarily helping us out right now. They're like, oh, yeah, never mind. We're going to forego your payment. So that's why I think crowdfunding is a great first step if you are going down the fundraising path.
I think the process that you describe of knowing your target market and doing the networking, sort of building that confidence to go out and really sell your product to people, right? Crowdfunding, I think, could obviously be a great way to raise money, but also to start exercising that muscle, because if you think that owning a business is not about selling your product, you're right, you've got a big lesson to learn about being in business. So I think I've never had this sort of aha moment before, but I would have said before this conversation, crowdfunding is probably not for me, because that's like for someone who's a little bit more outgoing or like a little bit more comfortable doing that thing. And now my position is, well, we should all be comfortable doing crowdfunding if we are really going to step into that role of CEO and business owner, because it's the day-to-day work that we're going to have to do to grow our business. So many light bulbs going off over here. I so appreciate that.
I'm so glad.
And I love that you brought into the discussion, that crowdfunding is not like a credit card or an SBA loan or a bank loan that is borrowed money, in the sense that you are immediately going into debt in your business. So are there other opportunities for business owners to fund their businesses, other ways to get money aside from crowdfunding, and then those three kind of debt producing methods that we just touched on?
I mean, so crowdfunding being one of them, but there's also differences between rewards-based crowdfunding, which is Kickstarter, Indiegogo, GoFundMe. You don't even have to have rewards for. But then there's equity-based crowdfunding. So equity-based crowdfunding is when a person is going to own a portion of your company. And so this is a thing that people need to also pay attention to. If you are a small business who wants to be able to make all of the decisions, equity-based crowdfunding is not for you. You have to, if you want to maintain a percentage and only have a percentage of your company and you don't care about what it is, then go for it. So there's some differences there. So equity-based is another option for funding. Then you have the opportunity for grants. So grants is something that for-profits can actually apply for. I think more times than not, we think they're just for nonprofits or those who have a 501c3, and for-profits can actually apply. The hard thing is with any sort of grant is you do have to have some sort of revenue. I hear this oftentimes where then people say, oh, so it's not for a startup. That's not what the word startup means necessarily. And I think that's a whole nother thing that we have to start teaching people the right vocabulary and what the actual definition is. Yes, they're for startups. It's just, you do have to have profitability and you have to have some sort of revenue. And then other ways are angel investors without having to go into debt. Angel investors are those who are investors in a company and they're actually going to maybe hold a seat on your board, but they are not, and they actually have money to give to your company because they believe in it. They'll be advisors and hold advisory roles. You do not have to pay back that money more times than not.
Fantastic. So I want to just go back really quickly to the grants one more time, because I think that a lot of people, like you said, you think you need to be perhaps a nonprofit to apply. So we're checking that box, like not actually true. But you do have to have revenue. And then you also said profitability. So you have to show, what I'm hearing, and I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly, is that you've got to show that you've got a profitable business model.
You have to show that it will become a profitable business model.
Okay.
Let me correct myself and say you do have to have a minimum, more times than not, of $24,000 of revenue.
Really, really interesting. I think the other misconception potentially about grants is that well, maybe this isn't a misconception, so let's talk about it, that they're very competitive and that your odds of getting a grant are very small.
They're small. They're small. I was texting with a colleague today, and we were talking about this and how so many people are holding out to see if they are going to be getting a grant before they start crowdfunding or before they start doing any sort of fundraising. And I compared it to holding out to win the lottery. Right. Like, oh, I'm not going to get a job because I might win the lottery one day. Like, no, you may win the lottery. You still need to pay your bills before you do, or if you win the lottery.
Yeah.
It is important, though, that you do apply for them. It's not hard to apply for grants necessarily, as long as you have kind of a business plan, a pitch deck, understand that there are a lot of grants out there that also require you to have a 60-second video. And the video is all about, it's your pitch, it's your company. So just have all your ducks in a row, and then you're fine. Just keep applying for things and hopefully you get one. You never know. But there are thousands and thousands and thousands of applicants who do apply. So just be aware of that. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't go after it. It's like, going back to college, thousands of applicants apply. You may or may not get in, but when you do, you still make the best of it. And that's great.
I think there's the stakes are high. They feel so high because there's money attached to it, right? And so it becomes this sort of internally and mentally overwhelming type of thing. And I think it's just one more place within owning and operating a business where you have to say, okay, this might not work out, and that's okay. We're going to go for it anyway. And we're going to, I think you might've said this earlier in our episode notes, like, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Kind of, apply for those grants, do that, and then keep moving forward with a solid plan and approach to, number one, operating your business successfully and profitably, and finding funding that makes sense for your business. While we're sitting here talking about crowdfunding, right, and you have to put a dollar amount on that, before you turn it on, right, and officially start asking. If you're applying for grants or even an individual grant, you've got to have a sense of like how much money you need to be sort of applying for. So do you have any recommendations for business owners, food business or otherwise, in terms of how to determine how much money you should be raising?
Well, work with a financial coach like you before you do this. So my whole thing has been, I'm still paying off business credit cards and business credit card debt. Like I'm going to put that out there. Like, I was working with a financial coach. I am still moving and making payments on it. I shut down my business 4 years ago. Do you really want to ask for more than you need when you're still going to have to pay it back and get jobs that you don't really want just to pay your credit card off or your loan off?
I love that. Straight talk.
Yeah. And I think this is the difference between men and women right here in men and women business owners, is that men, get a higher chance of having the loans, and they usually have a smaller percentage. Women on average have a higher percentage, yet they pay it back faster than men do. And they ask for a smaller amount, but yet they are turned down for loans more often than men are.
So interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really interesting. So for any of you listening who are thinking about, well, I do need some money in the business and I'm not quite sure how much to ask for, do what Elizabeth said, work with a financial coach, whether it's me or someone else, right? If you don't know how to forecast for your business or set goals for your business, I think clarity is a key word for this conversation. in its entirety, really, right? Like clarity on your target market, clarity on what you need to do before you make a move to find funding, right? Which opportunities, which avenues are the right ones for you, whether it be crowdfunding or angel investors or grants within crowdfunding, which type of crowdfunding is right for you, right? Getting clarity before you move forward, I think is going to be really important in the process. And then having clarity on how much money do you need to have to meet the goals and objectives that you want to with said money, right? So I've got a 3-step goal setting process that I think can apply to this, where you need to understand, like, what are the costs of operating your business, right? And are you covering those now? You know, just what is that amount? And then what are the goals that you want to achieve? And you might need to do research, but you got to figure out what is the dollar amount that you are assigning to each of those goals. Do they need to happen in a particular order, right? And then once you understand what that amount is, then you can proceed to either, you know, go out and find the funding for that. And in the case of other businesses that are, you know, trying to do it without funding, this same process works for what do my sales goals need to be and what do my cost targets need to be for me to hit these sort of profit margins that I need to. So love that. Love, have clarity, have a direction, know where you're going, right? It's so much easier to get where you're going when you kind of know where the end point is and you've got a map for getting there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and this is why I think it's okay for people to stay in their 9-to-5 a little bit longer. I know that it feels like there's that push and there's passion. And I'm probably that person who I'm the business coach that's just really direct. And I think passion is only going to get you so far. Passion is not going to get you the sales that you need to actually be able to have revenue. Yeah. And you still need to make sure that it's not to say to not follow your passion, but just pay attention that you're going to have some side hustles and some side gigs on the side to be able to keep food on your plate.
So let's bring it back to iFund Women and a little bit about the work that you are doing today in your role as startup coach. I would love it if you could define for us the term startup, because you kind of touched on that a little bit ago, that like people maybe don't understand exactly what that term means. Like, I think one potential misconception is that startups are tech companies and like only tech companies. They've sort of hijacked that term a little bit. But so what is a startup and what are the ways that you individually are helping people and the organization as a whole?
Absolutely. So a startup is the beginning stages of a business. So it's the before you launch, so idea phase, wanting to get going, all the way through until you actually start raising investor round of funds. So seed round, angel investors. So that can actually take years. So crowdfunding, getting business loans, and even maybe 1 or 2 people who are equity investors, those are still startup phases. When you go into the next rounds where you can actually make a higher profit, that's when you're out of that phase and I'm no longer the person you need to be speaking with. Right. And so that's okay. So there's a place for us around. So a lot of times you're probably anywhere from the 3 to 5 year mark, beginning to 3 to 5 year mark is where we're going to be working with you. Okay.
Interesting. And then what does that work look like?
So the work for iFund Women specifically is helping people with coaching calls from how to do a business plan to, if you're going to go down the fundraising path, how do we actually help you with a crowdfunding campaign? So what are your rewards? How do we make sure you have a really solid pitch? But also things that I coach on are how do you build your network and how do you utilize your community to do that? And then I coach on sales strategies and how do you have a sales funnel? And I think that's another thing a lot of businesses don't think about because they just think, oh, well, I'm just going to have a product and take it door to door. And that's how I'm going to make money.
Yeah.
And that's a great start. It's not going to necessarily get you there. And so we have to come up with a plan.
Thank you so much for your time today,
You're
Elizabeth.
welcome.
It was
you.
such a pleasure to talk with you. Find Elizabeth at iFundWomen. I will share your email address and your other contact information in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you.
Bye.